17-year-old high school senior Lee Larkin sat alone at the end of the dugout. His teammates and coaches studiously avoided him and left Lee alone with his thoughts. The age-old superstition was front and foremost in everyone's mind. Lee slipped on his batting helmet, grabbed his bat, and made his way to the on-deck circle. He swung his bat in time to the opposing pitcher's warm-ups, his bat whistling through the air. Unusual for a game of this importance, the crowd watched in eerie silence as Lee took his swings in what might be the last inning of the series. Before this game, the series had been a non-event for Lee. He had cheered his teammates on from the dugout but had seen zero playing time. Now they were playing in the third and final game of the state championship, and at times, Lee felt a curious detachment from the event. It was almost as if he was watching someone else. Lee's team, the Ferguson High School Wildcats, were playing the Amarillo High School Sandys. Technically the Golden Sandstorm, Lee had learned, although no one called them anything but Sandys. It was a double elimination tournament, and they had split the first two games. The winner of this game would be the state's 6A champion. The game would ordinarily be played in the Arlington Stadium, where the Texas Rangers played, but due to mega pop star Tony Speed extending her Dallas concert appearance for an additional 2 nights, the game was being played at Ferguson High School. There were protests lodged, but the Rangers would not budge. 2 additional nights of Tony Speed's sold-out concert revenue against a high school baseball game? That decision left the two teams unsuccessfully scrambling for a stadium for the state championship. Lee had been able to hear the conversations of people in the stands for the first few innings, but after the third inning, the stands had grown mostly silent. As the game progressed, more and more people showed up. The stands were now filled to overflowing as people lined the outfield fences to watch the game. Lee glanced around the stands as he swung his bat around to loosen his shoulder muscles before taking his practice swings. The donut weight on the end of his bat made a whistling noise as it sliced through the air. It was the only sound on the baseball field as all eyes were on Lee in the on-deck circle. Lee took another look around the stands but did not see either his mother or Terrible Barry. At least Sloan was there, sitting next to her parents. As long as Sloan was there for him, he could put up with a lot of life's nonsense. The beautiful auburn-haired teen saw Lee looking at her and smiled and waved to him. The love and pride she held for him radiated off her. Lee's gaze wandered past the center field fence where he watched the lone figure standing with binoculars to his eyes. Lee knew that the watcher would be at exactly 501 yards, not an inch closer than 500 yards and not an inch further than 501. The restraining order had been very clear and precise, and there was no doubt in Lee's mind that either his mother or Terrible Barry would call the police if the watcher violated the order. The game had started the same as any other playoff game, with the same case of nerves and panic that was to be expected from teen boys suddenly tasked with playing for big stakes with the series tied at 1-1. Lee had suited up the same as everyone else on the Cats but had not expected to play. He had not played all year. The Tommy John surgery that he had undergone 11 months previously had healed, but Coach Borden had consistently declined to put Lee on the roster. As time went on, his arm healed, and the tendon grafted from his left leg became stronger and more elastic. Lee's arm felt great, yet he continued to ride the bench. He would have sat this game out too, if not for the fact that Steve Gilmer, the scheduled pitcher, had smashed his thumb in shop class. Coach Borden was mad and Steve was embarrassed. He told Coach that he could still pitch. Coach told Steve to sit this one out. He penciled in Larkin for pitcher and hitting 9th. Lee was going to start as pitcher for the first time in over a year. As the home team, the Cats took the field first and would bat in the bottom of the inning. As he threw his warm-up pitches, Lee felt an overwhelming calmness settle over himself. The anger and embarrassment that he had been feeling until now left him as he suddenly felt lighter and more energized than he had in weeks. His feelings towards his mother and Terrible Barry were no longer clouding his mind. He stepped off the rubber and looked past the center field fence at the lone figure standing well away from the field and the crowd. He tugged the bill of his baseball cap towards the figure in silent acknowledgement. Lee threw his last warm-up pitch, and then as the ball was tossed from Gary Neal to first base and then around the infield, he walked towards Gary, his best friend and catcher. "What's up, Ella?" Gary asked. "My arm's feeling great today. I'm going to push it a little." Gary frowned at that. "Are you sure that's safe? Are you healed up enough?" Lee shrugged. "I guess we'll find out soon enough." Gary slapped Lee on the back and trotted back to home plate to begin the first inning. The first batter of the game stepped into the batter's box and planted his feet. Gary signed for a four-seam fastball, and the resulting throw sounded like a rifle shot as it hit Gary's mitt. Gary stared at Lee in shock. He had barely seen the ball before it was in his mitt. He turned towards the Pitch FX display to check out Lee's pitch speed, 95 mph. He slowly turned in disbelief towards Lee, who shrugged. Coach Borden looked on in open-mouthed surprise, as did the Amarillo coach. Called strike one. Gary again called for the four-seamed fastball. Lee nodded and then went into his windup. Called strike two. At 98 mph. Gary called time with the umpire and trotted out to the mound. What the heck, Larkin? Where did those come from? I don't know, G. My arm feels great, and all the nonsense between my mom and dad and terrible Barry seems to be out of my mind. I think I can throw faster than that even. Dude, don't mess up your arm, Gary warned. True dat? Lee replied. Lee's next pitch was his splitter, which the batter gawked at as it cut the corner of the plate for a called strike three. The second batter took a cut at Lee's first pitch, which turned into a behind-the-plate pop-up foul, which Gary easily caught for the second out. The third batter took a swipe at Lee's first pitch, a split-finger fastball that broke suddenly before reaching the plate. Strike one. The batter watched as Lee's second pitch, a changeup, cut the corner of the plate for a called strike two. Lee's third pitch was a four-seam fastball, knee level, straight down the middle of the plate. The batter watched it go by for a called strike three. 3 out. 3 outs with a pitch count of 7. In the bottom of the first inning, the Cats did not do much better than the Sandys had in their half of the inning. Gary Neal, the leadoff batter, walked, and then the next hit into a double play. The third batter for the Cats, Toby Hughes, the shortstop, flew out on a long drive to right field to end the inning. The first half of the second inning went very much like the previous first half. Lee had been able to compartmentalize the turmoil that was going on in his personal life as he faced the cleanup hitter for the Sandys. The batter got a hit off of Lee's first pitch, a slider. The hit was a short dribbler back to Lee, which he fielded one-handed, easily making the throw to first in time to throw out the runner. 1 out. The second batter took 2 called strikes before taking an embarrassingly late swing on Lee's four-seam fastball. 2 out. The third batter hit Lee's first pitch, a changeup that turned into a pop-up foul right beside the third base coach's box. Terry Tyler, the third baseman, easily caught the foul. 3 out with a total pitch count of 12 after 1.5 innings. The Cats managed to strand runners on first and third when the second inning ended for a score of 0-0 after 2 innings. Lee's first 2 pitches in the third inning were wicked curves that seemed to hang over the plate like ripe oranges before plunging toward the batter's knees. The batter's attempts to hit the ball looked like someone trying to kill snakes with a garden hoe. Gary called for the four-seam fastball. Strike 3 at 102 mph, 1 out. The Amarillo coach screamed timeout, marched to home plate, and started complaining to the umpire and gesticulating wildly. Coach Borden strolled over to home plate to listen in. I've never seen any high school kid throw that fast. Something's not right here. The umpire had removed his mask to speak with the Amarillo coach. I've never seen any pitcher throw that fast, high school, college, or pro, the umpire said. He looked towards Coach Borden. Coach, who is this guy? The Amarillo coach says he's never played before and he thinks he's a ringer. Coach Borden shook his head no. Lee Larkin is a senior at Ferguson High. This is his 3rd year with the team. Last year he had Tommy John surgery. This is his first game since the surgery. The umpire shook his head and chuckled. What did they replace that tendon with? Adamantium. Okay, coaches, let's play ball. The second and third batters didn't do much better than the first. The second batter struck out on 3 pitches, and the third batter managed to make contact with the ball on Lee's second pitch. The ball landed a foot in front of home plate, and Gary was able to throw the runner out with time to spare. 3 outs with a pitch count of 20 after 2.5 innings. 9 batters and 20 pitches meant that Lee was averaging less than 2.25 pitches per batter. During the inning break, the coaches and umpires were huddled together for a brief meeting with the UL representative monitoring the state championship game. After the huddle, the coaches reported the meeting to their respective teams. A sub-channel of the Dallas ABC affiliate had been broadcasting the game, but because of Lee's pitching, the game was now being carried on ESPN. The game had gone national because no one had ever seen a high school pitcher throw over 100 mph. The Cats, now having to contend with a collective case of nerves after suddenly finding out they were playing on national TV, were once again unable to score a run in their half of the inning and soon took to the field to begin the fourth inning. Lee's fourth inning went very much like his third inning. 3 up, 3 down with 9 pitches thrown by Lee. In the fifth inning, an Amarillo player tried to lay down a bunt. Lee's split-finger fastball caused the ball to jump off the bat and right into Lee's glove. The next batter grounded out at first on Lee's second pitch, and the third batter whiffed on 2 pitches before taking a called strike 3. 3 outs with a total pitch count of 35. As the Cats entered the dugout for the bottom of the fifth inning, the other coaches and players sat apart from Lee, as was traditional for a pitcher that was in the middle of a possible no-hitter or perfect game. He understood what was happening and made things easier for everyone by sitting at the end of the bench. Lee noticed that the stands were much fuller than they had been at the beginning of the game. He also began hearing bits and pieces of conversations from people sitting near the dugout. Channel 8 interrupted their broadcast to carry the game. ESPN is picking up Channel 8's feed. The game is going national, most dominant example of pitching that anyone can remember. Amazing. It's blowing up social media. Lee cleared his mind and focused on the task at hand. He didn't want to disappoint his teammates. Above everything else in his life right now, Lee wanted to succeed for his team. Other than Sloan, the Cats were all he had left. The team was everything. Lee had struck out in the third inning and managed to repeat his performance at the plate in the fifth. No Wildcat managed to score in the fifth, so at the end of 5 innings the score remained tied at 0-0. As the Cats took the field to start the sixth inning, a quietness had descended upon the crowd watching the game. Everyone knew that they were watching something extraordinary. Every pitch in Lee's arsenal was working. His fastballs were achieving speeds never before seen at any level. The Pitch FX cameras clocked his fastest pitch at 106 mph, 106 miles per hour. The Amarillo players were nearly in tears due to their frustrations. Hit the ball? I can't even see the dang ball, one of the Amarillo players could be heard shouting to his coach. Out of the corner of his eye, Lee could see a reporter interviewing Sloan and Grady Neal, Gary's father. He shrugged it off. Sloan was poised and circumspect and would not say anything that she shouldn't. Grady Neal was a different story. He was one of Lee's dad's best friends and a bit of a hothead. The sixth inning was nearly a repeat of the previous inning. 3 up, 3 down. 6 pitches were thrown, 1 strikeout and 2 infield pop-ups. 3 outs with a pitch count of 41 through 5.5 innings. In the bottom of the sixth, the first 2 batters for the Cats struck out, but miraculously, the next 3 hitters were able to get on base, where they were left stranded as the 6th hitter of the inning struck out. Everyone in the dugout continued to avoid Lee. This was beyond paying homage to a longtime baseball superstition. Everyone on the team knew that they were seeing a once-in-a-lifetime event. Their feelings were awe, tinged with nervousness. How could this be happening at a high school game? Incredible feats like this didn't even happen in the majors. During the last inning of high school regulation play, Lee proved to be even more in control than in the previous innings. His fastballs were eerily accurate. During his warm-ups, wherever Gary placed his mitt, Lee managed to throw a rocket into the pocket. 3 up, 3 down, only this time, Amarillo tried a new tactic. Every batter tried to bunt. Tried, because when you cannot even see the ball coming, all you can do is face the pitcher, hold the bat at waist level, and pray you catch a piece of the ball, which every batter managed to do on the first pitch, and then get thrown out at first. 3 up, 3 down with a pitch count of 44 through 7 innings. Lee was the leadoff hitter in the bottom of the 7th. He took a swipe at the first pitch and managed to hit a blooper down the third baseline. The ball hit a rock or some other foreign object and bounced over the third baseman's glove, managing to stay fair for a base hit. The next batter for the Wildcats was Gary Neal, the catcher. He took a called strike before managing to lay a perfect bunt down the first baseline, advancing Lee to second before being thrown out at first. When the next batter came to the plate, Lee took a lead off of second base, and as soon as the ball left the pitcher's hand, Lee took off for third, sliding into the bag safely, well under the third baseman's glove thanks to the Amarillo catcher bobbling the ball as he pulled it from the pocket of his mitt. 1 out with 1 man on third. The next pitch was a fastball right down the center of the plate, and the batter went for it, sending the ball deep into right field, where the right fielder managed to catch the ball at the warning track. But not before Lee tagged the base and ran home for the Wildcats' first and only score. A walk-off win. At the end of 7 innings, the score stood 1-0 in favor of the Wildcats. The local audience as well as the television audience had watched a star being born. The game ended with Lee's teammates swarming him and hugging him. Tears of happiness and congratulations came from everyone as they exulted in the sheer joy that comes with winning a championship. They also knew that they would forever be a part of history thanks to this game. Lee managed to extricate himself from the crowd and walked a little distance away as he looked past the center field fence. He held up his hand and gave a small wave to the lone figure still standing by himself. The figure dropped his binoculars and gave Lee 2 thumbs up. The figure was too far away for Lee to see the tears streaming down the man's face. The pride and love of a father who had just witnessed his son do something extraordinary. The Wildcats had won the state 6A championship. Lee had pitched a perfect game, throwing a total of 44 pitches. He had faced 21 batters, the absolute minimum in a 7-inning game. He had averaged a fraction over 2 pitches per batter. The game had not only been shown on ESPN and the local ABC affiliate from the 5th inning onward, it had been live tweeted by reporters. The game had gone viral and Major League Baseball players from across the country had tuned in to ESPN to watch what was happening in Dallas. Professional baseball players and other athletes and celebrities were retweeting the game and were amazed at the kid in Texas. 106 mph in high school. Who is this kid? Prodigy throwing faster than anyone else. Reporters were mobbing the team, bombarding the coach with questions about Lee Larkin and wanting to throw questions at him. Who was this kid? And then, where is this kid? But while no one was looking, the kid had left quietly, leaving hand in hand with a red-haired beauty and dodging the crowd and the reporters. Carol Larkin tried to smile politely at the conversation around her. She knew that the other partners were disappointed in her. She had left her husband for a coworker, and not just a coworker, but a much younger coworker who had the reputation of being a player. She also noticed the disapproving looks cast her way from the spouses of the other partners. A woman with loose morals was a danger in the workplace. The wives didn't trust her around their husbands, and the husbands didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. 18 years with BKW Accounting, and it looked like her future was in doubt. If so, her career could be placed on the trash heap that included her marriage and her relationship with her son. Tears sprang to her eyes as she excused herself from the 10-person table to use the restroom to fix her makeup. Have to keep up my appearance, she thought, cynically. They're the only thing I have going for me now. When she returned a few minutes later, she was surprised to find the table nearly empty. She looked around the dining room and noticed that most of the tables had emptied. "Where's everyone?" she asked. "They're in the bar." "Some high school baseball game has everybody all excited," Barry said, rolling his eyes. "Shoot," Carol exclaimed. "Ferguson High is playing." "I forgot all about that." "Doesn't your son play for Ferguson?" Jeannie Beaumont asked. She was a senior partner at BKW and, until recently, had been a staunch supporter of Carol. "He does, but he's not playing this year because of the surgery he had last year." "Ha, there must be another Larkin playing for Ferguson, because that's who all the excitement is about," Jeannie said. Carol stood up so fast that her chair was knocked backward. She ran towards the bar, thinking to herself that there was no way that Lee was playing. If he could not have reached her to tell her that he was playing, then her husband would have kept trying to reach her until... Suddenly, the thought that calling her would be cause for her husband's arrest popped into her mind. Her husband could not call her, would never call her again. That thought brought a physical pain to her stomach that caused her to gasp out loud. "Oh my goodness, it's only high school," Barry said with disdain as he stood to follow Carol into the bar area. He had never been an athlete and did not understand what the big deal was. Darn Texans and their sports. The bar was packed but was eerily quiet as everyone watched the television. Every screen in the bar had been tuned to the baseball game. It was the top of the 7th and Amarillo was batting. Carol recognized the windup of her lanky son. Everyone in the bar could hear the pop as the ball slammed into the catcher's mitt and the batter just stood there with a confused look on his face. An insert appeared on the screen: 106, 2 mph. The announcer commented, "According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the fastest pitch ever recorded in the major leagues was in 2010 by Aroldis Chapman at 105, 8 mph. Lee Larkin, a high school senior, just exceeded that by nearly a half mile an hour. And that's not even the fastest pitch he's thrown today. That pitch was in the 5th inning and was clocked by pitch FX at 106, 7. Folks, we are witnessing something extraordinary today. The visitors' half of the seventh inning came to an end and the camera panned around the players, catching Lee sitting by himself in the dugout. The camera cut away to a reporter who was standing next to Sloan and Grady Neal, Gary's dad. "I'm here with Sloan Taylor?" Lee Larkin's girlfriend and family friend Grady Neal, who also happens to be catcher Gary Neal's father. "You must be very proud of your boyfriend," the reporter stuck the microphone in front of Sloan. "I am," she replied. "But not just for this. Lee is the smartest, kindest boy I know. He's going through a lot right now, but he's performing with grace and dignity and I love him so much. That's true love right there. Lee is a lucky guy to have someone like you supporting him." The reporter smiled. He turned to Grady Neal. "I understand that you are best friends with Lee's father. We're a bit surprised that his parents aren't here to witness this historic performance from their son." Grady shook his head. "I probably should keep my mouth shut, but I'm not going to." Sloan said that Lee was going through a lot right now. That's an understatement. Lee came home early from school a few weeks ago and discovered his mother in bed with a younger co-worker. They didn't see him, but he called his father to come home. When his father got there, he got into a fight with his wife's boyfriend, who then called the police. They arrested Lee's dad, and now there is a restraining order against him. He has to stay at least 500 yards from his son, his wife's boyfriend, and his home. So Lee is dealing with all that, and then he comes out here and does this. Grady shook his head in admiration. "But you're wrong about his parents not being here. At least one of them is. Out past center field is his dad, watching from 500 yards away, just like the restraining order requires." Carol felt physical pain. In the mirror over the bar, she could see the shame and mortification written on her face. The directors, VPS, and their wives had subtly moved away from her, leaving Carol standing alone next to Barry. "That's ridiculous," Barry shouted. "He didn't fight with me. He got in one lucky punch." Everyone in the bar turned to them after hearing Barry's comment. Carol was having trouble breathing and felt like she was going to pass out. Jeannie took pity on her former protégé and escorted her to the restroom. "Oh, Jeannie, I have messed things up so badly. I just want to hide. That's all your son and husband need. To have to deal with a selfish cheater hiding away. You need to be brave and fix all the damage you've caused to the people who love you. If you don't, I'll buy you a nice treat." It was after midnight when Lee finally got home. He tried to be as quiet as possible while opening the front door, since he didn't want to get into it with either his mom or Jerk Barry. He was surprised to find his mother sitting on the sofa in the den in her bathrobe, a tissue wadded in her bathrobe. Her eyes were red and she had been crying. A glass of white grape juice sat next to a bottle on the coffee table in front of her. Great, thought Lee to himself. Mom of the year, weepy and upset. Since he wasn't going to be able to sneak by her, he tried to ignore his mom as he walked past her. "Hi, baby," she said. Lee ignored his mother as he continued towards his bedroom. "Lee, please stop and come talk to me. I don't want to argue with you or him tonight. I just want to go to my room and get some sleep." "I heard you played tonight." "Yes, you pitched." "Yes." Carol sighed. Her son was not making this easy on her. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have been there to support you." "You know why I didn't tell you," Lee replied. "You wouldn't have come by yourself. You would have brought your boyfriend with you. I would rather have no one come to support me than have him there smirking at me. And anyway, Dad was there to see me play." Carol's eyes opened widely in surprise. "Your father was there? He violated the restraining order?" "No, he didn't violate your precious restraining order. He watched with his binoculars." From 500 yards away, Lee said with a bitter edge to his voice. "The restraining order was not my idea," Carol said softly. "I thought he was going to hurt Barry. I have never seen your father so angry and upset. Odd. I wonder what set him off? Oh yeah, catching his wife in his marital bed with her boyfriend. Go figure." Lee. "I know I'm not your favorite person these days." Lee snorted at that. "Ya think? Please, Lee, I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too." "You're hurting?" Lee asked in mock incredulity. "You ruined our family by cheating on your husband, and then had him arrested, and you have the nerve to tell me you're hurting." Lee took a deep breath to calm himself. "Where's Jerk Barry anyway?" Carol looked down at her hands. "You won't be seeing Barry around anymore. I told him that I didn't want to see him anymore. Jeannie Beaumont fired him after he called me a mean word in front of the other partners. You flushed your family down the drain, and now you have nothing to show for it. Now you can't even pretend it was this grand romance and that love conquers all. It was never a grand romance. It was a cheap, sleazy affair between a selfish, foolish woman and an opportunistic bully. The grand romance was what I had with your father. What I ruined, Carol said as she sobbed into a tissue. Lee sat down across from his mother. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely in front. Then why? Why throw us away? If it was because you found your soulmate, I could understand. I still wouldn't like it, but I could at least understand your motive. But now, you've got nothing. No husband, no boyfriend, no son. Nothing. Lee shook his head, a puzzled look on his face. What was it all for? It was so that an insecure, vain, selfish woman could prove to herself that she still had it. Carol shuddered. What I proved was that I was not worth the love and affection of the two best men I've ever known. Carol started sobbing again as tears streamed down her face. You're still my mother and I'll always love you, but I don't like you very much. I think maybe I should find somewhere else to live for a few months. I can get a dorm assignment at the end of August and move down to Austin. We'll be out of each other's hair and you can live your life and do whatever you want with whoever you want. Lee waved his hand toward his mother's bedroom for emphasis. Carol started sobbing harder. Mom, Lee said gently. Carol reined in her emotions as she looked up at her son. Get the restraining order canceled. I want to spend time with my dad. Carol nodded as her sobbing restarted. The baseball team had been directed to report to the locker room at 7:30 the next morning. Lockers had to be cleaned and any equipment that belonged to the school was to be returned. Coach Borden approached Lee as he sat in front of his locker sorting out the contents of his locker. Lee, can you see me in my office before you go? The coach asked. Sure, coach. I'll be done in 5, Lee said. After taking his seat in front of the coach's desk, Lee looked at the coach nervously. Being called into the coach's office was never a good thing. Coach Borden reached across his desk to hand Lee a 1-inch stack of pink notes. Lee looked at him in confusion. Coach? Those are phone messages that were left on answering machines in the principal's office and the ad's office. There would have been more, but every machine was filled. Every reporter, university athletic director, and baseball coach in the country is trying to reach you. No one here has ever seen anything like it. Your disappearing act last night didn't help. ESPN wanted to talk to you. Lee shrugged. I didn't have anything to say to them. I just wanted to get away from everything and relax with Sloan before going home and facing that nonsense. Lee, you're a great kid. One of the best I've ever coached. I know you're going through a tough time at home right now. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. I mean it. I also know you've been upset about not getting much playing time even though you thought you were ready. Some things are more important than winning. I wanted to make sure your arm had plenty of time to heal, so even though you were cleared a month ago, I held off starting you. And I'm glad I did. Geez Louise, what was that all about? I don't know, coach. My arm felt fantastic last night. It still does today. It feels like I could pitch another 7 innings right now. Coach Borden smiled. Well, let's not do that, okay? Ted Larkin sat at the small dining table in his 2-bedroom apartment, which came furnished. It was mid-year review time for his direct reports, and this was one job he couldn't pass on to someone else. After completing his 3rd evaluation, he got up to grab a soda from the refrigerator when his doorbell rang. Ted opened the door to find his 17-year-old son standing there. Ted enveloped his son in a tight hug before stepping back. You shouldn't be here, Lee, he said. It's okay, Dad. The restraining order was lifted. Are you sure? This isn't a trick your mom and her boyfriend are playing to get me back in jail? Never in a million years did Ted Larkin think he would ask that question about his wife. The thought alone was devastating. It's not a trick. And that jerk is out of the picture. Mom finally came to her senses. Ted shook his head, frustrated. Too little, too late. I'll never understand why she destroyed our marriage and family for that guy. I'm not sure she could give you a good answer to that. I know she's been seeing a counselor every day for the past week. She's trying to understand it herself. She says you're the best man she's ever known and the best husband any woman could have. But when we talk about it, she just looks confused. Lee and his dad chatted for the next 2 hours, catching up on everything going on in Lee's life. Lee had been accepted to the University of Texas at Austin before baseball season started. He planned to go to medical school after getting his undergraduate degree, so most of his courses were in science and math. His parents were prepared to help with the loans for college and medical school, but something interesting had happened. Even though Lee hadn't planned on playing sports in college, he was being offered scholarships to play baseball at almost every school with a baseball program. Some schools even mentioned building a program around him if he committed. Of course, that wasn't an option, but a scholarship to UBU would significantly help with medical school expenses. I'll support whatever decision you make. If it was football, I'd say no, don't risk injuries. But baseball, that's different. What does your mom think? She feels the same as you, it's my choice. I think I'll let you know I'm interested. There was a pause as Ted cleared his throat. Other than counseling, how is she doing? Not good. She got served with divorce papers a few days ago. When I got home, she was curled up in bed, hugging your wedding portrait and crying. Damn her, Ted said in frustration. She messed everything up. The town of Ferguson held a parade for their hometown baseball team, which wound through downtown and ended in Ferguson City Park. The high school marching band entertained the crowd while they waited for the speeches to begin. The baseball team and coaching staff sat on a temporary stage as various speakers and sponsors praised the team and their own organization's support. The mayor introduced each sponsor speaker, who had 2 minutes to address the crowd. The final speaker was a representative from BKW Accounting Services. As the attractive woman from BKW walked up to the microphone, the crowd booed loudly. Carol had begged her company's senior partners for a chance to speak to the baseball fans and begin making amends. Carol Larkin stood strong, despite the boos and name-calling. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked down at the stage. Eventually, the crowd quieted enough for Carol to clear her throat and begin her speech. I asked my employer to let me speak today. We at BKW are incredibly proud of the Ferguson baseball team and our sponsorship. As many of you know, my son is Lee Larkin, who pitched the third game of the championship series. The crowd cheered at the mention of Lee's name before settling down to listen. I wasn't there at the game. I should have been there with my husband, supporting our son, but I wasn't. I don't know if that makes me a failure as a mother, a wife, or both. But I failed my son. I failed his father, my husband. I failed my employer. I disrespected both my husband and my son, and I am ashamed of that. Carol turned towards Lee. Lee, I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me someday. If you don't, it will bring me unbearable sadness, but I will accept the consequences of my actions. Carol then looked to the crowd, searching for her soon-to-be ex-husband. Ted, I'm sorry. More sorry than you'll ever know. You are the best man I've ever known, and you and Lee deserve so much better than me. I truly apologize for everything I've done. The crowd mostly remained silent as Carol finished her speech. There were a few half-hearted cheers as she left the stage, but overall, it was a somber response. Ted had not looked at her once during her speech. Lee and Sloan walked hand in hand, and with Ted strolling alongside them as they met Carol walking down the park's sidewalk. Thank you for saying that, Lee said. I meant every word, Carol replied. I can never apologize enough for tearing our family apart. She teared up. Anyway, what are you three up to? Carol asked, trying to smile bravely. Sloan is going out with her parents, and Dad and I are going to Esparza's for Mexican food, Lee said. What about you? I'm going home and will probably order a pizza and watch some TV, Carol replied, mustering a sad smile. Ted hadn't said a word as Carol spoke with their son. As they said their goodbyes, Ted turned his back to Carol and walked away without looking at her once. Lee and Sloan managed their long-distance relationship as best they could. They didn't date anyone else and rarely attended parties. They focused on studying and frequently FaceTimed each other. When they were alone in their dorm rooms, they would get on video calls and show their affection for each other. Their college experience continued. Lee played baseball for the Longhorns and Sloan focused on her engineering degree, occasionally playing intramural volleyball at Stanford. The Longhorns struggled during Lee's first 3 years on the team. The first 2 years, their batting was weak, and the third year, their pitching was subpar. It wasn't until Lee's senior year that all the pieces fell into place. Lee stood on the pitcher's mound and rolled his shoulder to relax. He had been in a similar position 4 years ago, except then he had been a senior in high school playing for the state championship. Now he was a senior in college playing in the College World Series. So many similarities, so many differences. 60 feet 6 inches from the rubber to home plate. Just like in high school. 9 players on each team, just like in high school. Same size baseballs, same aluminum bats, but everything was faster and harder and longer. In the 7-inning state championship game in high school, the other team had been terrified of his pitching. In the 9-inning college games, not so much. They respected his pitching, but no one was scared of it. He had managed to put up several no-hitters and 3 perfect games during his college career leading up to the CWS. For the first 2 years of his college ball, his team had pitching but no hitters. For his 3rd year, he was the only decent pitcher, but they finally had some hitters. This year, his senior year, they had it all. Hitters and pitchers, and the Longhorns had dominated. After this game, Lee was finished with baseball at TUT. He had been signed by the Texas Rangers Baseball Club for a contract worth $100 million, and they were contractually obligated to work around his medical school at UTU Southwestern in Dallas. Lee was going to take some of his money and buy a couple of acres of land in Ferguson to build and equip a sports medicine clinic after he graduated medical school and completed his residency. He was also going to buy a few acres outside of Ferguson to build a house for Sloan. Sloan. If anything, their love had grown stronger. Sloan spent every weekend studying. She never went to parties or took part in any of the typical college activities. She was there to get her degree, and that was it. From Sloan's point of view, it was pretty simple. Her boyfriend was tall, handsome, kind, and funny. He was destined to be one of the greatest baseball players of all time, as well as being a doctor. No one could compete with Lee. Why would she put her future at risk for the sake of having a fling with a frat boy? It would make no sense at all. If nothing else, the experience of Carol Larkin served as a stark reminder of how badly a marriage can go off the rails for the flimsiest of reasons. Not for her. Never for her. No, Sloan was in a good place. She would wait for Lee. As the batter stepped into the batter's box, Lee focused his mind on the task at hand. Lee went into his windup and released the ball, a splitter for a called strike one. The batter turned to face Lee and raised his hand in a loose fist with his fingers towards his chest. He moved his fist up and down in what Lee would term a dismissive gesture. Lee's catcher made a fist and extended his middle finger pointing downward, the sign for frustration. Lee grasped the baseball along the seams and went into his windup. Lee sent the ball exactly where his catcher had placed his mitt along the inside of the plate, chest high to the hitter, who jumped back and landed on his backside to the laughter of everyone in the crowd. Ball 1. Oh well. Lee threw 2 more pitches. The last pitch the batter looked at helplessly as it floated over the plate a half second after the batter's swing. 3 up, 3 down. And so it went, all the way towards a championship ring. The parade and after-party after winning the CWS dwarfed what Lee had experienced in Ferguson. Maybe because there were so many more people. Maybe because the students and players were old enough to drink. Whatever the reason, it had been an exciting celebration that Lee, Sloan, and Ted had looked on with amusement. As the trio walked across campus, they were unexpectedly met by someone they were not expecting to see. "Mom," Lee said in surprise. "I didn't think you were coming." "I wasn't, but I was able to switch days off with someone else and drove in this morning." "You drove?" Lee asked in surprise. Lee should not have been surprised, he thought. 4 years ago, Carol had resigned from her job at BKW Accounting and had accepted a job in the accounting department at Ferguson Memorial Hospital. "Yes, I'm on a budget, you know," Carol said with a smile. "Where are you 3 off to?" "We have reservations at Trulux," Lee said. "Well, enjoy yourself." "Ted, you're looking well." Carol had tears in her eyes as she looked at her ex-husband. Ted had not spoken to his ex-wife in 4 years. If they needed to discuss their son, it was done by email or text. He merely nodded at Carol's compliment. As the trio turned away, Ted leaned over and spoke to Lee, who looked at him in surprise. "Are you sure?" Ted shrugged as he thought about it before nodding his head. "Hey, Mom, purr me?" Lee shouted to the back of his departing mother, who stopped and turned around, a quizzical look on her face. "Why don't you join us for dinner?" Lee and Sloan were walking hand in hand along a path in Ferguson City Park. It was Thanksgiving, and they were taking the fall semester off before beginning the next chapter of their schooling. Lee in medical school and Sloan in graduate school. "Seriously, Sloan. It's unfair for you to be stuck at home every weekend. You're beautiful and fun to be around." Lee paused before adding, "And I miss you." Sloan side-eyed Lee. "Are you asking me to move in with you? How would that work?" Lee shook his head. "You're the only person I ever want to be with. I trust you. I used to think that if my mother could betray my dad, then anyone could betray anyone. But I know better now. I've never seen anyone as protective of someone else as you are with me. I want us to live together. There is no one else for me, and there never will be. But I am not moving in with you yet. We're going to stick with our plan. You finish medical school and play pro ball. Then we get married and start building our lives together. So let's not discuss this any further. Lee's lips quirked up into a smile. Yes, ma am. I'll shut up. Lee had told his dad that he would stay over at friends that night, which his father knew meant that Lee and Sloan would be getting a motel room that night, but Sloan's period had started, so she was not feeling the romance. Lee entered his dad's apartment and noticed the fire in the fireplace and 2 glasses of wine. Not again, Lee thought to himself. Lee had started backing towards the door when a blonde woman walked out of his dad's bedroom carrying a bottle of wine. Mom, Lee shouted at the same time as Carol shouted, Lee. At the scream, Lee's dad came out of his bedroom, wearing only jeans as Carol ran back into the bedroom. I see you two have met, Ted said dryly. Lee rubbed his eyes and said dryly, do you have any bleach for my eyes? So how long has this been going on? You remember when we all went out in Austin after your graduation? Lee nodded his head. He had been shocked by his father's suggestion that his ex-wife join them for dinner. A week or so later, I was home and feeling lonely, I guess you'd call it. It's been over a year since Lisa broke up with me, you know. Lee nodded. His father had dated Lisa, the VP of Human Resources at his job, for nearly 2 years. Ted was on the verge of proposing to the woman when she suddenly and unexpectedly ended their relationship. She had explained that she knew Ted was going to ask her to marry her, and she never wanted to marry again after 2 previous failed marriages. She finally confessed to Ted that both of her prior marriages had ended due to her unfaithfulness, and that she could already feel a sense of restlessness in her relationship with Ted and decided to end it before she cheated. Ted had been sad but admired her honesty. He had dated sporadically over the last year but had never dated the same woman more than twice. Anyway, I called your mom pretending I had a question for her about you. We talked for a bit and she asked me about Lisa. When Carol found out from Lee that her ex-husband was in a long-term relationship and that it had grown serious, she was heartbroken. She knew that she had only herself to blame, but that did not lessen her feelings of sadness. She wished only the best for her ex-husband and hoped that Lisa would be a better partner for him than she had been. When I explained that Lisa and I were over and done, your mom asked me if I wanted to come by her place for a couple of hours. I laughed and told her no thanks. I could tell that hurt her. Anyway, a couple of hours later I was ringing her doorbell. Ted smiled at the recollection. Wow, Dad, I'm not sure if you meant that as a metaphor, but it's definitely too much information, Lee said, shaking his head. Carol walked back into the living room, wearing one of Ted's dress shirts. And he's been visiting me a couple of times a week ever since, but she said, smiling at her son's discomfort. So are you two back together? Friends with benefits? In a complicated relationship? Lee asked, with a slight hint of anger in his voice. He remembered the pain his mother had caused his father during their divorce. Carol shook her head. No, your father will never fully trust me again, and I understand why. I'll take whatever part of him he is willing to give me and be there for him whenever he wants. I haven't been with anyone since our divorce, and I won't be with anyone other than your father. Your dad is free to date as often as he wants. All I ask is that he uses protection with other women. Lee shook his head in disbelief. So you're in a one-sided open relationship? This was against everything he believed in. Ted nodded at Lee's question. Yes, we are, but I haven't been with anyone else. Your mother is very focused on keeping me busy, Lee said with a slight chuckle. Oh my gosh, Lee muttered as he waved goodbye to his parents. Lee had aced the MCAT, but it wasn't just his scores that secured him a spot at UTU Southwestern Medical School. His fame as a rookie professional baseball player and his recent victory at the College World Series made him a highly sought-after candidate. Although there were concerns about juggling professional baseball and medical school, Lee's contract with the Rangers ensured that he had a quick way home and study time on the road. He hired a tutor to accompany him, and all travel arrangements were taken care of by the team's travel office. This arrangement allowed Lee to make progress in medical school, although he often felt exhausted. Sloan was pursuing her MS in Applied Cognitive and Neurosciences at the University of Texas at Dallas. She planned to continue to a doctorate and become a research fellow. Being near each other had caused Sloan and Lee to change their plans. They decided to get married before Lee finished medical school. It was a small ceremony attended by close family and friends. Lee's best man was his friend and former catcher, Gary Neal. Gary's father had hesitated to attend because of the public exposure of Carol's infidelity. But to Carol, it wasn't a big deal. It helped her snap out of her affair fog. She held no animosity towards Grady Neal and was glad to have him at Lee's wedding. After their honeymoon in Hawaii, Lee resumed medical school while Sloane continued her graduate studies. They had a few months of school and holidays before Lee had to report to spring training. Lee took a break from medical school and planned to resume in the fall. It would take him longer to complete his studies, but he was determined to be ready for his residency by the end of his current contract. He had no plans to extend his playing career beyond that. During spring training, Lee worked on drills and practices. His mechanics were solid, and his speed continued to increase. His fastball consistently reached speeds of 112 to 115 mph, with his fastest pitch recorded at 118. 2 mph. Led by Lee's dominant performances, the Rangers swept the Astros to win the American League West, and then swept the Orioles to win the American League Championship. This meant they would face the Phillies in the World Series. The first game of the series was a shutout, which Texas won 4-0. Lee pitched the entire game with a pitch count of 72. In the second game, the Rangers won 3-2 in 11 innings. Lee wasn't present as he had to fly back to Dallas immediately after the first game for his classes. The third game took place in Dallas, and the Rangers lost, 1-1. The pitching staff and hitters couldn't get any momentum. The Rangers extended their lead in the series to 3-1 with a win in the fourth game. Their hitting was the key factor, rather than their pitching. Game 5 was crucial, as it could be the final game if the Rangers won, or they would have to travel back to Philadelphia for the last 2 games. Lee was announced as the starting pitcher. The first 6 innings saw Lee face 18 batters. The Rangers had a 3-0 lead. As Lee prepared to throw his first pitch of the inning, he took a moment to soak it all in. He knew that soon they would win the World Series and he would celebrate, but he had class in the morning, so his celebration would be short-lived. Lee spotted his dad sitting by himself in the section reserved for players' families. He silently acknowledged his father by tugging on the brim of his baseball cap, to which his dad responded with 2 thumbs up. Lee then saw 2 women passing by his dad. One was a slim redhead holding an infant, and the other was a pretty blonde, considerably older than the redhead, also holding an infant. It was a shock for Lee to find out on the same day that he announced his parents would be grandparents that he was going to be a big brother. Ted and Carol hadn't remarried, but they maintained a close relationship that went beyond being friends with benefits. They remained monogamous, never dating anyone else. They each had their own homes, but most nights they shared a bed. Occasionally, Ted would have moments when he felt triggered and would want nothing to do with Carol. It saddened her, but she understood that it was a consequence of her past actions. She knew that Ted still loved her, but not as much as before, and she would never regain the blind trust she once enjoyed. Having a child was unplanned and caused Carol to have an anxiety attack. In a panic, she assured Ted that she hadn't been with anyone else and even offered to have a DNA test or end the pregnancy if he preferred. Ted required the testing, and it confirmed that he was the father. There was no doubt in Ted's mind that they would have the baby, despite Carol being 44 years old. Monitoring and testing revealed no health issues, and 3 weeks after Lee Larkin Jr. was born to Lee and Sloane, Liam Larkin was born to Ted and Carol. Carol was not amused by the nickname Lee gave his brother. She didn't like that he called him Lil Bastard. As Lee watched the 2 women go back to their seats, Sloane waved at him, and he tapped his chest twice, once for his wife and once for his son. As the catcher threw the ball to Lee for his first pitch of the inning, he stepped on the rubber, nodded at the signal, and thought to himself that no matter what pitch he threw, it wouldn't be hit. Epilogue 15 years later. Dustin's Dustbin by Dustin Draper, sports columnist special to the Dallas Herald-Observer. I ran into an old friend last night at Esparza's Mexican restaurant in Grapevine. Doc Larkin and his family were enjoying dinner and admiring the Christmas decorations in downtown Grapevine, known as the Christmas capital of Texas. Let me tell you, Doc looked fantastic. He still had that aura of someone who could walk out onto the mound and pitch a no-hitter. It's hard to believe it's been 15 years since that unforgettable November night when Doc pitched a perfect game against the Phillies to win the World Series. And even harder to believe that it's been 9 years since he retired from baseball. How many people would turn down a $500 million contract? Well, Doc did. Doc Larkin's sports medicine clinic in Ferguson has expanded twice and is now considered one of the top clinics in the country. They specialize in Tommy John procedures and are at the forefront of research and treatment for CTE injuries, concussions, and traumatic brain injuries, thanks to the brilliant work of Doc's wife, Dr. Sloan Larkin. Doc was out with his wife, 3 kids, his parents, and his younger brother, whom he amusingly calls LB. I know there's a story behind that, because every time he says it, his mom rolls her eyes and gives him a playful scolding before smiling at her youngest son. So anyway, Doc and his family were out celebrating his parents' 5th wedding anniversary. Yes, you read that correctly, 5th, with their 37-year-old son and their 15-year-old son. And don't you know there's a story waiting to be told about that? Setting the record straight, doctors performing ulnar collateral ligament UCL reconstruction surgery, most commonly known as Tommy John surgery, are pretty well unanimous in stating that the procedure does not improve performance or allow the person having the surgery to throw harder and faster than before having the surgery. And yet, there is anecdotal evidence that the surgery has helped pitchers to the point that there have been requests by some baseball pitchers to have the surgery performed on healthy UCLs. There have been no successful uses of indestructible materials in Tommy John surgery or any other sports medicine procedures, although there is rumored to be ongoing testing with promising results in a specialized clinic located at 1407 Graymalkin Lane, Salem Center, Westchester County, New York.